Hearty welcome to one and all to the discussion on contemporary Indian philosophy. Today we shall take a look at the topic Swami Vivekananda on the spiritual nature of man. A spiritual genius of commanding intellect and power, Vivekananda crammed immense labor and achievement into his short life, spanning from 1863 to 1902. Born in the Datta family of Calcutta, the youthful Vivekananda embraced the agnostic philosophies of the Western mind along with the worship of science. At the same time, vehement in his desire to know the truth about God, he questioned people of holy reputation, asking them if they had seen God. He found such a person in Sri Ramakrishna, who became his master, allayed his doubts, gave him God vision and transformed him into sage and prophet with authority to teach. After Sri Ramakrishna's death, Vivekananda renounced the world and crisscrossed India as a wandering monk. His mounting compassion for India's people drove him to seek their material help from the West. Accepting an opportunity to represent Hinduism at Chicago's Parliament of Religions in 1893, Vivekananda won instant celebrity status in America and a ready forum for his spiritual teaching. For 3 years, he spread the Vedanta philosophy and religion in America and England, and then returned to India to found the Ramakrishna Mutt and mission. Exhorting his nation to spiritual greatness, he awakened India to a new national consciousness. He died on the 4th of July 1902 after a second, much shorter sojourn in the West. Let us now take a look at the influences that shaped his philosophy. The philosophy of Swami Vivekananda was born out of the awareness of the social, religious and economic conditions of the Indian masses. The deepest influence upon his thought is of ancient Hindu philosophy, especially of Vedanta. The main body of his thought is derived from the Hindu scriptures, most importantly the Upanishads. His belief in the essential unity of everything and the doctrine of Maya owes its origin to the Vedanta. The distinction between an empirical point of view and a transcendental point of view that he makes often to solve certain apparent contradictions of his thought is also borrowed from Vedanta. He, however, emphasized on the need for reinterpreting Vedanta in accordance with the demands and needs of the time. There are at least 3 ideas in the philosophy of Swami Vivekananda for which he remains indebted to Buddhist thought. The first and foremost is the idea of mass liberation that he envisages, which has a striking resemblance to the Buddhist ideal of Bodhisattva. Secondly, he was deeply influenced by the Buddhist statement that the raft with the help of which one crosses a river in storm should be left for the use of others. Buddha himself, even after attaining nirvana, kept on roaming about and helping others in their struggles against suffering. Swami Vivekananda recognized the worth of such humanitarian and altruistic work. He himself exhibited an extraordinary missionary zeal for service in his life. Thirdly, some of the Buddhistic ideals like Samyak Karmanta and Ajiva have also inspired Swami Vivekananda to a great extent. He was also influenced by Christianity, especially the strength of character and the soul force of Jesus Christ. From Christianity, he adopts the ideals of service and love. For some time in his early life, he was influenced by the Brahma Samaj. His strong feelings against the prevalent orthodox and superstitious rites were generated under that influence. He also admired the personality of Dayananda Saraswati. It can be said that Dayananda's emphasis on the indeterminate nature of reality and his insistence on fearlessness left a deep impact on Swami Vivekananda. The Bhagavad Gita, with its emphasis on selfless work, was a source of constant inspiration to Swami Vivekananda. The most profound influence in the light of which every other influence was remodeled and reshaped was that of his master Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. Sri Ramakrishna brought about a spiritual transformation in the personality and mental makeup of Vivekananda. It was his master who taught him the divinity of the soul, the non-duality of Godhead, the unity of existence, and the universality or harmony of all religions. Let us now take a look at the nature of man as envisaged by Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda asserts that the real in man is a concentration of spiritual energy. Man, according to him, is a spirit. The word spirit here has both a positive and a negative import. In its negative import, which is usually given more prominence, it is believed that the spiritual is not the ordinary and is therefore different from the empirical. Swami Vivekananda does not reject this implication of the word spiritual. Man is not what he ordinarily appears to be. Over and above this, man is spiritual in a positive sense also. He represents some aspirations and urges which only he is capable of having. He has devoted much time and energy in trying to determine the spiritual dimensions of man. His emphasis on spirituality is such that even the bodily aspects of man are spiritualized. Let us first take a look at the physical nature of man. The human being in the philosophy of Swami Vivekananda is an organized unity of the spiritual and the physical. He never undermines the importance of the physical nature of man. The fact that man is always asked to awaken his spiritual nature presupposes the existence of another dimension that is different from but yet akin to his spiritual nature. That is his physical nature. The physical nature of man includes the bodily, biological and the psychological aspects of man's nature. The body itself represents the physical nature of man. He also occasionally refers to the subtle body and to some other bodily centers that are talked about in Tantra Vidya. The physical nature of man can be apprehended if the structure, function and importance of the gross body are clearly understood. Swami Vivekananda points out that even in his physical capacity, man is superior to other beings. In strength and sheer brute force, many animals are more powerful than man. Many animals possess keener and sharper senses than man. Still, the physical nature of man is superior to other animals because it is better organized and exhibits a greater unity than other animals. His responses to the environment are not merely instinctive and mechanical. His physical behavior follows a plan and pattern. His responses to physical stimuli exhibit a sense of purpose and choice. The human brain distinguishes man from every other species and gives him a unique status in the world. Let us now turn to the spiritual nature of man. The uniqueness of a spiritual nature is also due to the presence of spirituality in him. Swami Vivekananda does not deny the reality of the physical dimension of man, but asserts that it represents only his inferior nature. The real nature of man consists of his capacity to go beyond his physical nature. The true nature of man is his soul force or Atman. In his description of the Atman, he follows the line of the Bhagavad Gita, where the Atman is described as the self, beyond all thought, one without birth or death, whom the sword cannot pierce or the fire burn, whom air cannot dry or water melt, the beginningless and endless, the unmovable, the intangible, the omniscient, the omnipotent being that is neither the body nor the mind but beyond them all. This brings to light two essential characteristics of the Atman. First, that the Atman is divine in nature, and second, that it is not possible for us to give an exact description of the nature of the Atman, at least in a language that finite individuals are capable of using and understanding. Like a true Vedantin, Swami Vivekananda identifies the true nature of the Atman with the Brahman. Unless the two are identified, the monistic character of reality cannot be maintained. If the self is accepted as a part of the one, then we will also have to admit that the one reality is composed of parts or has aspects within itself and is therefore not simple. The selves cannot also be conceived as expressions or manifestations of the Absolute, as in that case they would have to be admitted as separate realities over and above the Brahman. This leaves us with only one option, that is to conceive the self as identical with Brahman and the differences between the two as only apparent and not real. Let us now move on to the discussion on the real and apparent nature of the soul. Vivekananda explains the difference between the soul's real nature and apparent nature in various ways. He adds that this apparent difference does not affect the true nature of man. The self, which is in fact one and all comprehending, appears as the manifold. This concept is illustrated by Swami Vivekananda with the help of several analogies. One analogy is that of the sea and waves, where the waves apparently seem to have an identity of their own, but is in reality one with the ocean. He also uses the classical Vedantic analogy of Pratibhimbavada, where the same moon is reflected in different pots of water. Here, the reflections in water are apparent, the reality being the moon only. Therefore, he concludes that there is only one Atman, eternally pure, perfect, unchangeable and unchanged. All the changes observed in this universe are only the appearances in that one self. Swami Vivekananda admits that normally we do not have an awareness of this oneness, but some experiences and realizations can be taken to be pointers in this direction. The most common example of such an experience is the feeling that one is capable of having in the face of adversities and problems when he persistently tries to fight them out and to solve them. The very realization that nature provides almost a challenge to man and that man can unravel the mysteries of nature is itself an evidence of his divine nature. Another evidence of this fact is the inherent capacity of man to go beyond. If we survey the life of man either in its collective aspect or in its individuality, we find that there is no upper limit or boundaries that can be set around him and beyond which he cannot go. His quest for truth knows no bounds. He comes to acquire knowledge or comes to enrich his personality by doing something good and noble, and yet he can still go ahead. This capability of self-transcendence is itself an evidence of the basic oneness of Atman and Brahman. Yet, Swami Vivekananda admits that it is not possible for us to comprehend the nature of this identity. This requires an extension of consciousness to its farthest possible limits, and we cannot do that in the limited spheres in which we live. Our mental capacities and our consciousness that operates through the mind-body mechanism and our embodied existence are inadequate to have a complete understanding of this aspect of man's nature. All spiritual pursuits are the ways through which we seek to understand this essential aspect of man's nature. At this point, an important question arises. If the soul is identical with Brahman, why do we experience the plurality of souls? The identity of the Atman and Brahman implies that monism is the truth, but a strict monistic system cannot accommodate a plurality of souls. This is an important philosophical problem that is closely related to many other challenging problems. The problem of plurality of souls, the problem regarding the relationships between two aspects of a soul and the problem regarding the relationship between the mind and the body. Swami Vivekananda attempts to solve them on the same lines as those taken by classical Vedanta, but in the process he has emphasized on points that have not been emphasized by Vedanta. In his view, the plurality of souls and the experiences of births and deaths are only apparent. Questions in this regard are misleading. The one Atman neither comes nor goes. It is neither born nor does it die, and so the question of its reincarnation does not arise at all. In tune with classical Vedanta, Swami Vivekananda believes that the Atman is never deluded. In the state of realization, the Atman clearly becomes aware that the plurality of selves is an illusion, and this illusion is itself a sporting play of the Atman. The point where Swami Vivekananda tends to deviate from classical Vedanta is in his assertion that the finite aspects of man should not be treated as completely false. As long as man ignorantly believes in the reality of the embodied state and in the plurality of selves, this aspect is real for him. Therefore, human upliftment would consist not in a complete annihilation of this aspect, but in its being raised and perfected. Swami Vivekananda points out that an ascetic who denounces and suppresses his material needs may be a great man, but greater is the man who raises his bodily aspects to perfection. Let us now take a look at Swami Vivekananda's concept of freedom. The real nature of man is freedom. Freedom is not conceived by Swami Vivekananda as a character or a quality belonging to the soul. It constitutes the very essence of the soul. A quality or character is something different from that to which it belongs. But freedom does not belong to the soul is freedom. Swami Vivekananda believes in the law of karma. According to him, actions produce tendencies, karma in accordance with which our future lives are determined. Actions are normally performed out of ignorance. Human beings forget their own nature, fail to discriminate between the real and the unreal, and consequently perform their actions in the light of wrong and false notions. Such actions create samskaras or tendencies which determine his future nature. This notion raises a contradiction between the determining character of karma and human freedom. If man's entire personality and actions are determined by his karma tendencies, then man is determined. Then how can we say that freedom constitutes his real nature? To this, Swami Vivekananda replies that freedom does not imply a complete absence of determining characters, because then freedom would only be a state of chaos. Freedom does not imply indeterminism, but it is self-determinism, a condition where the agent is determined not by any extraneous factors but only himself. Moreover, the final release or liberation rests ultimately on man's own actions. By his own good deeds, man can win over his ignorance and suffering. This also vindicates man's freedom. The Atman always remains free. It is never in bondage. The apparent state of karma and bondage is really a delusion created by ignorance. It is merely a leela in which the soul has become involved. When he would win over his delusion, he would be amused to find that he was in fact never in bondage. Let us now take a look at immortality as the destiny of the soul as described by Swami Vivekananda. Our awareness of the usual state of the soul creates the impression that the soul is a suffering individual, limited in his capacities and actions. This makes us thoughtful of the ultimate destiny of the soul. Swami Vivekananda is convinced that there is no contradiction between our impression of the soul's limited capacities and the impression that the soul is in reality never in bondage and is hence immortal. The literal meaning of the word immortality is both its minimum meaning and its most universal meaning. Literally, it means deathlessness. By calling the soul immortal, literally we mean that death is not the end of the soul and that the soul survives death. This negative meaning of the word immortal is least controversial and universally acceptable. Swami Vivekananda also accepts this basic meaning of the word immortal, and in trying to determine its positive character leans heavily on the Vedanta and on his own realizations. Like the ancient Indian thinkers, he believes that the soul survives death and that this survival first assumes the form of rebirth and finally the realization of immortality. Immortality here means not merely getting out of this world, but also of the cycle of births and rebirths. There are thus two aspects of immortality: survival and immortality as such. Survival means that death is not the end of life. Here Swami Vivekananda brings in the doctrines of ignorance and karma and incorporates them in his doctrine of soul. The soul performs actions in ignorance which creates certain tendencies, otherwise called samskaras, which determine his next birth. But are repeated cycles of birth and death the destiny of the soul? This cannot be so, for the embodied state is a state of bondage. The ultimate destiny of the soul must be a complete freedom from bondage, which demands that the repeated cycles of births and deaths are terminated. But does this mean that immortality is a prize to be won at the cost of strenuous and persistent effort? Won't this standpoint contradict the position that immortality is the essence and very nature of the soul? According to Swami Vivekananda, these two positions are not contradictory and incompatible with each other, and both can be maintained at the same time. It has to be accepted that without maintaining that the soul is immortal, we cannot maintain that the soul can realize immortality. The realization of immortality requires the soul to grow or evolve, but nothing which is not already there can evolve. The seed grows into a tree only because the tree is already potentially contained in the seed. Thus, it can be said that the soul is able to realize immortality because the soul is immortal. The soul in ignorance is not aware of its immortality. It has to be made aware of its immortal nature for it to manifest its immortality. Swami Vivekananda says that it is like finding the lost necklace on one's own neck. All the time we search for it in all directions, but it was always in our own neck. Evolutionary growth also favors this concept. From the lowest protoplasm to the most perfect human being, there is but one life. Immortality is also the consummation of the growth of man, and therefore we shall have to believe that it is the same basic being which expresses itself from the beginning to the end. Let us now summarize the concepts discussed in this particular module. Swami Vivekananda is one of the greatest visionaries of modern India. He awakened not only the Indian masses but people from all parts of the globe, from the slumbers of ignorance to light and freedom. Although rooted in classical Vedanta, his philosophy has its unique flavor and freshness. One of his greatest endeavors was to make people aware of the dimensions of the human personality. He holds a balanced and mature view of the human personality. The physical dimension is given its due importance, but the focus and emphasis is on the spiritual dimension of the human personality. Spirituality is the watchword and the key to freedom. immortality is described as the essence of the soul. It is not something to be acquired from outside, but that which is to be acquired and realized from within. Evolution is only the process of manifesting that which was potentially within us always. Let us discuss a few assignments related to this topic. First, how does Swami Vivekananda strike a balance in his conception of the physical and spiritual nature of man? How does Swami Vivekananda explain the identity of the Atman and the Brahman? What are the two aspects of immortality that are described by Swami Vivekananda? Freedom constitutes the very essence of the soul. Elucidate. How does Swami Vivekananda reconcile the apparent contradiction between the theory of karma and human freedom? Let us now take a look at some important books related to the concept that we have just discussed. The first important work which I would like to introduce you to is the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, published in 8 volumes. These are the words of Swami Vivekananda himself. They were published at Mayavati, Almora, the birth centenary edition in the year 1963. Another important work is the selections from Swami Vivekananda, again penned by Swami Vivekananda himself. This is a compilation made by Swami Pavitrananda and published by the Advaita Ashram, Almora, in the year 1946. Another work to reckon with is Swami Vivekananda and his message, written by Swami Tejasananda. This work was published by Ramakrishna Mission, Belur Mutt, Calcutta, in the year 1965. Another significant work is the Teachings of Swami Vivekananda, written by Swami Yogeshwarananda. This book was published by the Advaita Ashram, Mayavati, Almora, in the year 1953. Another important work is Contemporary Indian Philosophy, written by Basant Kumar Lal, published by Motilal Banarsidas Publishers, Delhi, in the year 2002. Another work is Contemporary Indian Philosophy, penned by R. N. Sharma. This book was published by Atlantic Publishers and Distributors, New Delhi, in the year 1996. With this, we come to an end of the discussion of the topic Swami Vivekananda, the spiritual nature of man. Thank you, one and all.